Using wisdom to contemplate suffering. In using wisdom to contemplate suffering, center the contemplations on your own body and mind. Suffering is derived from the body. What are the causes of suffering? What are the contributing factors? Wisdom, paññā, must be used to investigate the cause of suffering so that the mind knows and sees these causes clearly. However, once the cause of suffering has been clearly understood and realized, it cannot simply be shed or released. This is because it is sabhava dukkha, or suffering that exists with the body and mind, thātukkhaṇḍa. This suffering is born at the same time as the body. While the body and mind exist, the condition of suffering, sabhava dukkha, must also exist. The only recourse is to acknowledge and accept this suffering. In other words, simply be conscious of suffering as the truth of suffering. There are tactics to temporarily avoid physical suffering. For instance, if you experience physical suffering from a prolonged period of sitting in one position, you can readjust your posture or modify your sitting style. This is a natural method of circumventing suffering for the short term. When it comes to lying down, there really isn't any position that is comfortable forever. At first, you might think one position is comfortable, but lying in the same position for a long time can bring about discomfort. So then you have to move about and continue to alter your position. This is how we avert suffering. When you experience physical discomfort from standing for a long time, you can avert that suffering by walking, sitting, or lying down. If you walk for a long time and experience aches and pains, you can avert that suffering by standing, sitting, or lying down. We can temporarily avert suffering by alternating among the postures, iriyapata. Therefore, understand that this condition of suffering cannot be eliminated. Merely be conscious of it. These characteristics of suffering are universal for all worldly beings. It is called tukkhang ariya satchang, or suffering is a truth that cannot be avoided. Even the Buddha and the noble ones, Ariya Pukkala, were subject to this kind of suffering. There is another kind of suffering called transient suffering, jahara dukkha. It can enter from the body and proceed to affect the mind. An example of this is weather that is beyond moderate, such as extreme heat or extreme cold. Anything that affects the body in a manner beyond moderation can cause physical suffering. This is called miscellaneous suffering, pakinaka dukkha. It is suffering that occasionally affects us at times. When the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind, sense bases experience displeasure, this produces suffering in the mind. All suffering convenes in the mind. Mental suffering stems from sense base, ayatana, perception. Mindfulness and wisdom must be employed to find a way to avoid this suffering. However, avoiding mental suffering is unlike avoiding physical suffering from various postures. When mental suffering that stems from the sense bases arises, mindfulness and wisdom must be used to teach the mind to clearly discern the resulting suffering, dukkha, harmful consequences, dosa, and future perils, paya, of that displeasing outcome. Likewise, the mind must also discern the results of a pleasurable outcome that leads to a preoccupation, aramana, of love. A preoccupation of love is impermanent and subject to change. As they say, where there is love, there is hate, or in Pali, piyato chayate soko, affection begets sorrow. If you are wise enough to realize the preoccupation, aramana, of love, and realize the preoccupation, aramana, of hate, you will know how to protect yourself and prevent that suffering from arising. All suffering is caused by desire. We create the cause of that desire, and the result corresponds to the cause that we have created. The suffering that we are all experiencing at this moment comes from our refusal to accept the consequences that we have caused. We create a bad cause, but desire a good result. Once we do not receive that desired result, we experience mental suffering. No one desires suffering, but it is our own actions that cause it. The suffering that all worldly beings face stems from desire. Therefore, desire causes all forms of suffering. This truth is evident all around us. Our place of birth or the status we are born into is unimportant because our suffering congregates in the 4 elements, jatu dhatu, and 5 aggregates, panca khanda. This suffering is coupled with our mental and physical existence until the day we die. In our past lives, in our present life, and in our future lives, we all experience suffering once we are born. Suffering results from all kinds of desires. Once we eliminate desire, tanha, from where would suffering arise? The Buddha taught that the wheel of desire perpetually turns toward suffering, cycling in accordance with its governing principles and irrespective of time. Not self, anatta, is that which has been the cause of constant disappointment. Because we do not know or see this, we wholeheartedly trust in the notions of self and self-belongings. We don't want to part with anything. However things have been, that is how we want them to remain forever. We don't want to be affected by death. We don't want to die, and we don't want our children or grandchildren to die either. We want to hold our loved ones close to us in an internal embrace. Be that as it may, we cannot escape the truth. As much as we love or worry about them, we must still die and go our separate ways. Imagine that you have built a house to temporarily reside in. Once this house becomes dilapidated, you must abandon it and build a new house elsewhere. And once that house becomes uninhabitable, you must abandon it and build a new one elsewhere once more. There is no end to this cycle. Similarly, the mind builds its existences, bhava, and rebirths, chati, and temporarily resides in the 4 elements and 5 aggregates. Before long, the mind's 4 elemental, 5 aggregate residence will become uninhabitable, breaking down in accordance with the principles of not self, anatta. It will cease to exist in that identity, atta. There will be no more human or animal at that point. Likewise, the physical body will correspondingly decompound into the 4 fundamental elements of earth, water, wind, and fire. The mind, citta, will seek out a new rebirth existence in accordance with its cultivated causes and conditions. The mind takes sole responsibility for its actions, speech, and views, however right or wrong, or good or bad in nature. The actions and speech are not held accountable in any way, regardless of whether it was a meritorious, punya, or demeritorious, papa, deed. Rather, it is the mind that bears full culpability for all outcomes, good or bad, stemming from acts fueled by the mind's desires. Therefore, it is critical for us to train and develop the mind with mindful wisdom. The models and parallels that will effectively teach the mind can only come from comprehensive, encompassing wisdom that is aligned with universal truths, such as Dhamma. Thus, the Buddha's teaching, cittang tantang sukha vahang, the mind, citta, that is constantly trained by wisdom will be rewarded with knowledge, intelligence, and happiness. Cittang rakketa metavi. Only a thoroughly wise mind, citta, can care for itself. Therefore, developing the mind, teaching the mind, and nurturing the mind must be done with choice Dhamma models and parallels. The mind has been guided by defilements, kilesa, desires, tanha, and mental formations, sankhara, for much too long. Consequently, it has lost its way and become ignorant of universal truths. Therefore, the mind must be frequently trained through wisdom.